All right, welcome to the deep dive. Today we're going to be taking a close look at student guidance in Morocco.
Okay.
So how the country is trying to support its students as they figure out their paths, both educational and career-wise. And to really dig into this, we've gathered a pretty amazing collection of documents going all the way from the Foundational National Charter of Education and Training,
Mm.
which is also known as the Mythac National. And then we've got stuff up to like the very latest roadmap from 2022 to 2026. And in between, there are all these important framework laws and ministerial decrees that flesh things out.
Yeah, it's really a thorough set.
It is, it is.
So yeah, I think we can get a really good sense of how things are developing.
Totally. So it's like we're going on a deep dive into Moroccan education policy here.
Exactly.
But we're going to extract the key insights from these documents, right? We want to see what the rules are, obviously, but also what are the big ideas behind them?
Right, the why behind the what.
Yeah,
The
exactly.
driving forces.
And also the actual structures they've put in place.
Right.
And even some of the challenges they've run into with how they approach this whole idea of student guidance.
Yeah, we can see what's working, what's not working,
Sure.
what's still evolving.
So for everyone listening, our goal today is to untangle this whole complex landscape.
To give you a map, so to speak.
Exactly. We want to give you a clear picture of how Morocco's trying to help students figure out their way forward, both in their education and then eventually their careers. So no getting lost in the weeds, no policy jargon overload, just straight to the heart of the matter.
Straight to the heart of it.
So let's dive in.
Let's dive in.
With such a comprehensive set of documents,
Mm-hmm.
where do we even begin to see the bigger picture?
Well, what's really interesting to me is that there's a real shift in thinking over time.
Okay.
Like we could see an evolution from maybe some more isolated efforts to guide students
Mhm.
to a vision of continuous support, like support that's woven into the entire educational experience.
So it's not just about like, right before graduation, figure out your options, go.
No, at all. Now, the strategic vision for the reform of the education system, that really emphasizes this early intervention idea. It stresses that students need help developing their personal projects. And this starts like right when they finish primary school.
Personal project. I feel like that's a term that keeps popping up
It is. It's key.
in all these documents. So in this context,
Mhm.
what does that actually mean?
So the National Charter, the Miak National, that was a really turning point. It put the learner at the center of the whole educational process, right?
Yay.
And that's a core principle. So building on that, the personal project of the learner, that's not just like a one-time decision. It's this ongoing journey of figuring out potential careers. Like, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Okay.
Mapping out the education and training you need to get there, and then making a plan to achieve those goals. But importantly, it also involves considering alternatives, like what if plan A doesn't work out?
Okay, so it's not just about the destination. It's
Right.
about having like a sense of direction and being flexible.
Exactly. Adaptability
So empowering students to think about their future, like proactively.
from a young age.
From a young age.
Yeah,
And to see their education as a tool to reach those goals.
exactly. It's a means to an end.
Okay.
And what's really important is that working on this personal project is becoming a standard part of school.
Like built in.
Built in, institutionalized. Starting at the end of primary school, it's not just a suggestion.
So it's a defined part of their education.
It is.
Okay, so personal project, that's a central idea.
Yes.
Now, let's look at the laws and the institutions that support this.
Yeah.
Like, how do they actually make this happen? The Mythac National, as an early document, seems like a logical place to start.
Yeah, definitely. It's foundational. So the Mythac, which ran from 2000 to 2009, it recognized that pedagogical guidance is absolutely essential to the whole education and training process.
It's not just an extra thing.
Not an add-on. It's a core function, right? It helps students mature, make informed choices about their education, their careers, and it even allows for them to change direction if they need to.
Oh.
Like if they start down one path and realize it's not the right fit. So this early recognition of guidance as crucial, it signaled a fundamental shift in how Moroccan education viewed student development.
Like, they weren't just focused on academics.
Exactly. It was about the whole person, their growth.
And it lays out some specific responsibilities.
Yes, absolutely. So Article 101, that details what guidance counselors are supposed to do.
Okay.
They need to inform students and parents about the different study options, job options. They have to assess students' learning abilities, see if they're having any difficulties, advise on the right pedagogical support, and crucially, help students develop those orientation choices and those personal projects we talked about.
Right.
And then Article 19, that emphasizes that guidance isn't just the school's job.
Right.
It's a societal responsibility.
Interesting.
It takes a village.
It does. It does.
And it's also interesting to note that the Methaq encouraged building bridges
Okay.
between different education levels and vocational training. And that's a theme we'll see again and again.
So creating pathways.
Pathways, yeah.
Okay, so the Methaq sets the stage.
Lays the groundwork.
What about the emergency program?
Okay, so that ran from 2009 to 2012. And it was really focused on putting some of the Methaq's principles into practice.
Like less talk, more action.
Exactly, especially when it comes to information and guidance. They wanted to build a more effective system for these services, making sure students could actually access information. And they promoted what they called active guidance.
Active guidance. So what does that mean?
So it's about encouraging students to take charge of their own future.
Okay, so not just being told what to do,
Right.
but actively participating.
Self-guidance is the term they used. And this was linked to those personal projects we've been talking about.
I see. So it's empowering students to take ownership.
Exactly.
Okay.
The program also tried to create clearer pathways between different educational tracks. And they wanted to unify, like to get everyone on the same page
Okay.
when it comes to who's involved in guidance.
So teachers, administrators.
Parents, even professionals outside of education.
So a more coordinated approach?
Much more coordinated, a unified front,
Okay, so step by step,
step by step.
we're seeing principles turn into actions.
And then along comes the strategic vision,
The strategic vision, 2015 to 2030.
a long-term plan.
What did it add to the conversation?
Okay, so the strategic vision, it took this much longer view, and it said, we need a complete overhaul of the entire guidance system
Like from the ground up.
from the ground up.
Wow.
And they called this their 12th lever.
Okay.
They wanted to redefine the concepts, the methods, the approaches, and have this unified national framework for guidance.
So big picture thinking.
Big picture. And it also broadened the role of guidance. It wasn't just about choices anymore. It was also about providing sustained pedagogical support. And remember that early support for personal projects.
Right. Starting young.
Yes. And importantly, it emphasized education for choice.
Okay. Education for choice. That sounds interesting.
It is, because it ties into that self-guidance idea. It's about giving students the skills to make informed choices about their education and careers.
Like critical thinking.
Critical thinking, self-awareness, decision-making. It's equipping them to take responsibility for those choices.
And then we get to Framework Law 51.17.
Mm-hmm.
This seems like a pretty big deal.
It is. It's where the rubber meets the road. Because this law says, okay, within 6 years, the guidance system needs a complete makeover.
Like a legal mandate.
A legal mandate, yeah. And it's all about personalized support for students, using up-to-date tools and methods, strengthening the institutions responsible for guidance, and improving coordination between the education and vocational training sectors.
So no more silos.
No more silos, working together. And Article 34, it's very specific. It says this revision has to help students figure out their educational paths and provide ongoing support through early guidance and giving them the right information.
So it's putting real legal weight behind these ideas.
It is.
And Article 8, just like the Methaq, it brings up those connections between school education and vocational training again.
Yes, it reinforces that. We need to have smooth transitions, clear pathways between these different parts of the system.
Now, let's get into the nitty-gritty, some
Right.
of the specific decrees. Decree and Degree 2.02.376 from 2002. That one outlines the roles of school councils and administration. What's our specific take on student guidance?
So this decree really brings it down to the school level.
Okay.
It's about how things work in practice, and it emphasizes the role of support staff, like general supervisors,
Okay.
in making sure students are doing okay.
Okay.
Not just academically, but also psychologically, socially, even their health.
So it's a holistic view?
Holistic, absolutely. And Articles 23 and 24, they talk about the pedagogical council. They're involved in organizing support activities and promoting initiatives that help students develop their personal projects. And they often work closely with guidance counselors on this.
Okay, so teamwork.
Teamwork, yes.
Yeah.
And then Articles 29 and 30, they say that both general supervisors and guidance counselors, they should be part of class councils when student orientation is being discussed. So it's not just a separate thing. Guidance is part of the regular school life.
It's integrated.
Integrated, woven in.
Okay, and then ministerial decision N degree 062.19.
Ah, yes.
This one seems very focused on the whole personal project idea.
This is where they really formalize it. They say, okay, Working on your personal project, it's not just a vague thing. There are 4 clear stages: familiarization, construction, consolidation, refinement. And they explicitly say that the educational administration is responsible for making sure this happens. They have to activate the mechanisms, provide support for personal projects. And this is done through specific pedagogical approaches, both inside and outside the classroom.
And it comes back to those pathways again.
It does. It does. They want to see more pathways, not just within formal education, but also between school education, vocational training, other options.
So lots of possibilities.
Lots of possibilities. And this decision, it makes a really strong statement. It says, guidance is a continuous process. It starts early, 5th level of primary school.
Wow, that's young.
It is. And they frame guidance as both a right for learners and a duty for everyone involved: schools, families, society as a whole.
So it's everyone's responsibility.
Everyone's responsibility.
To help students find their way. Okay, and finally, we have the Roadmap 2022-2026.
The most recent one.
The most recent one. So what are the current priorities and what are the challenges they're still facing?
Okay, so the roadmap, it has this very ambitious goal. It's commitment 4. And they want to make sure every student has access to quality guidance throughout their schooling. This includes career exploration and actual encounters with professionals in different fields. And they want to achieve all of this by 2026.
Okay, so a tight timeline?
A tight timeline. They also have plans to make vocational training in middle and high school more appealing, more relevant to what the economy actually needs.
So making it a real choice.
A real choice, yeah. They're also establishing what they call excellence pathways.
Okay, like what?
Things like preparatory classes, international sections, tailored paths for students gifted in sports or the arts.
So catering to different talent.
Absolutely. And a really important point is that they're revising the baccalaureate specialization streams. They want to make sure these streams are actually linked to what students can do after they graduate, both in terms of higher education and actual jobs.
So it's about connecting education to real-world outcomes.
Exactly. Making sure it's not just theoretical.
But the roadmap also acknowledges that there are still some gaps, right?
Oh yes, they're very upfront about the challenges. They say that current orientation efforts aren't reaching every student effectively,
Right.
especially students with diverse learning profiles. They might need different approaches. And they point out that there aren't enough options in middle school. For students who might not thrive in the traditional academic setting,
So more flexibility is needed.
more flexibility, more options.
Okay.
Then there's vocational training. It's still not as popular as they'd like it to be. And often students are oriented into those programs too late,
So they're missing out.
missing out on opportunities, yeah.
These sound like pretty significant hurdles.
They are. They are. The roadmap also mentions a disconnect between what's taught in middle and high school and the programs offered in higher education. And then another gap between those educational offerings and what the job market actually needs.
So misalignment.
A misalignment, yes.
Right.
And finally, that they point out that the baccalaureate specialization streams, they don't have clear criteria that are tied to actual academic and professional outcomes.
So more strategic planning is needed?
Absolutely. They need to be more intentional about how these streams are designed.
Okay, so we've got a vision, we've got structures in place, but there are still these practical challenges
Real-world
to
challenges.
make sure this all works for everyone.
For every student, yes.
Yeah.
And this is where the pedagogical approaches come in.
Okay, right. The sources mention the shift towards student initiative and the concept of education for choice. How does that fit into all of this?
So this shift is all about empowering students. It's saying, okay, you're not just passively receiving an education, you're actively shaping your own future. And education for choice, it's not just about giving students a menu of options.
Right.
It's about teaching them how to make those choices, developing their critical thinking, their self-awareness, so they can own those decisions.
So it's about agency, responsibility.
Exactly.
And what about transversal skills?
Transversal skills are crucial, absolutely crucial. We're talking about problem solving, communication, critical thinking, collaboration. These are the skills you need to navigate the real world, to succeed in education, in your career, and to adapt when things change. And they're also essential for self-guidance, for developing that personal project.
So they're the foundation.
They're the foundation.
Okay, so we've talked about policies, pedagogical shifts, goals. Now, who are the people on the ground making this happen?
So the sources highlight several key players. First, you've got the dedicated support staff in schools. General supervisors, other personnel, they're keeping an eye on students' overall development. And they're part of those school councils where guidance issues are discussed.
Okay.
Then you have the guidance counselors themselves. They're the ones providing information, doing assessments, giving advice. And teachers are playing a bigger role, too, in providing support that aligns with students' personal projects. And it's not just people in the school system.
Okay.
Families are encouraged to be actively involved. And professionals from different sectors, too.
So a collaborative effort.
A true collaboration.
And one thing that keeps coming up in all these documents is this focus on pathways.
Pathways and flexibility.
Flexibility.
It's all about creating smooth transitions between school education, vocational training, higher education. The idea is to match the training opportunities with what students are interested in, what they're good at, and also what the job market actually needs.
So it's a balancing act.
It is. It is. And they also want to give students the chance to change direction if their initial choices don't work out.
Okay.
And they're looking at revising the orientation procedures, making them more digital, more flexible, more responsive.
So it's a really complex and ambitious undertaking,
It's
building this whole student-centered system.
comprehensive and adaptable.
Comprehensive and adaptable, that's a good way to put it. So as we wrap up our deep dive, what's the key takeaway?
I think the biggest change we've seen is this shift from a reactive approach to guidance, where you're just reacting to problems, to a proactive, integrated, continuous process, where the learner is at the center. And the goal is to help students find paths that really fit them.
So it's a huge shift in perspective.
A huge shift.
An approach.
Yes.
So we've got all these policies, these reforms. It's a massive undertaking.
It is.
What do you think are the biggest hurdles that they still need to overcome?
Well, I think one of the biggest challenges is making sure all of this is implemented effectively. It's one thing to have policies on paper, but it's another to translate that into real change in schools.
Right, and reaching every student.
Exactly, especially those who might fall through the cracks.
And for you listening, as you think about this whole effort, what role do you see for individual initiative alongside these systemic changes? What can students, families, communities do to support this vision? That's something to ponder. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Thank you.